Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mining Now. I am your host, Gus Minor. We're here live at CIM 2023 in Montreal, and we are joined with two special guests here today from Osenko. We have the senior consultant, Joffrey Bouchard-Gorin, and we've also got the director of asset optimizations, Eric Delorme. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Thank you, Gus.
Very much.
How are things been going so far with the event?
Yeah, on my end, it's pretty good. So again, it's good to be back with the conference like this after the COVID and all that, and I'm missing some people for so many years, and having the chance to see what's going on in the industry and all that. So that's pretty interesting on my side.
Yeah, so it's great that you had an awesome turnout with your presentations, and I think, you know, with the conversation we're having today, we're really looking at finding out, like, what is it that Ausenko is up to, and what are the exciting statements that you're bringing to CIM, and also unveiling to the mining sector as well as oil and gas. What's brewing?
So we're a division within Ausenco being an engineering, consulting, and product delivery company. Been around for 30 years. They span 26 offices over 15 countries. And we're around 150 people in our division globally. So I'm more looking at operational readiness. Eric has all of Canada in terms of asset optimization. And we work closely with clients, mainly in the mining and metallurgical industries, to making sure that they're ready on the client side when the project is over. So it's a whole process that goes anywhere from 12 months to 2 years for us for operational readiness. And we're very much hands-on with the client at site, supporting them and all their different department managers to making sure that they're successful when the project is over.
Excellent.
Yeah, and from my side to add on Joffrey, so Joffrey takes care of like the operational readiness for new project, new sites and all that, but we're the resource for him inside the maintenance and asset management. So we do what we call the maintenance readiness. That's part of the operational readiness. But we're not only limited to the project and all that and the support work with the OR group, but we also take care of any other asset management consulting with the industry, mining industry, but any type of industry. We're still working in all type of industry in our business. So we have, again, a pretty wide range of service offering and that we're going to give to our clients. So so that's basically our group, how it's set up.
In a nutshell. So I guess, you know, through that operational readiness, I mean, something that we've had such an impact lately with, you know, the movement to electrification and the footprint recognitions of the landscape of mine sites, especially the fact that we have to produce so much more than ever before. I guess that's a lot of what you guys are offering as well, is minimizing the footprint, expanding the productivity while doing that.
There's a concept to that for sure. I think it's more looking at the whole 360-degree view of what the operation is going to look like at startup. A lot of people, they think it's OR is associated to just commissioning or spare parts or inventory, but it's really the full gamut of what each department needs to bring to the table to make sure that the handover is done properly. A lot of conversations start off with, well, what is our core and non-core business, and what's our strategy at the beginning to determine where we want to go? You had mentioned electrification. Well, we need to do that at the beginning, 24, 36 months early on, so that when it comes to procurement, we are able to get those trucks that are highly in demand from all the different miners, and also regionally, if you're competing with other miners, you're competing for labor and workforce, you need to make sure that that's been identified into your HR strategy. So all these discussions typically happen at the OR assessment phase, which is early on, typically around that feasibility, pre-feasibility. And then from there, that goes into the operational readiness plan. And then we look to execute that plan and make changes as we go along. But a lot of what you mentioned before, it needs to be top of mind with the corporate team so that we can then execute it here with the team locally and then be successful, because we can't change strategies when we're in execution. And that's where we have problems, because it's too late typically to hire. Typically when we're too late on hiring or too late on procurement, there's no working backwards.
Right. And from a change management process as well, like if you go from project to operations and then all of a sudden you have to retrofit or you have to upgrade all your assets, I can see that being a very, very challenging situation.
Yeah, and it's the same for us in asset management. There's so many things we can do prior to the commissioning and the startup of the site. A lot of things need to be ready in order for you to be cost effective when it's time to operate and maintain your equipment. And some example of that we do, there's a process we call the RAM analysis process. RAM stands for reliability, availability, and maintainability. So we can take the design from the engineers and look at the what we call the process flow diagrams, look at the design they've made, so we can model all those assets. Okay, and sometimes we use software to do that type of work, but we can modelize the design. We kind of estimate the durability of each of the asset, part of the design and the system. And at the end, we can tell you how many tons, ounces you're going to produce at the end of the year, what you can expect from the design that you do. And then we can do multiple scenarios. We can, let's say we have a pump, we have a single pump in line of the process. What happens with, we had a second one in parallel. So having two pumps parallel will be more reliable than just with one pump. So, but what's the cost to have this pump, okay, versus the amount of additional production we get at the end? So is there a payback to do that? So you can all optimize your design from the engineering side, and you're more likely to have the expected results after the commissioning with what you have designed. Because if you don't do that up front, realize later, hey, finally I needed a backup pump or parallel pump in my system. Do I have the place to put it? Okay. Is there a building big enough and all that? All the piping I have will have to change a lot of design. So it's going to cost you much more afterwards to do those changes. Now you have tools and you have things you can do up front, and for you to get a better design when it's time to maintain and operate, like I said, and get full value from your design at the end.
No, that's excellent. And I guess the warehousing as well, like the warehousing management falls into that. I mean, a lot of the projects that I've done in the mine sites where, you know, I walk in and there's 10 or 15 or 20 of the same parts and sometimes it's just because, you know, they were available. So we're going to stock them. But then the project ends or the operation ends and you got all of these spare parts you don't know what to do with them because now they may be obsolete and there's no return. Is that something that you look at as well? Is like, how do we maintain its spare parts?
It's the same with the design. So you try to have design spec that you give to your OEM vendors that give you produce you your asset and all that. So you make sure also there is a certain standardization. If you know that some components are reliable for you, you have experience with them and all that, and I would like as many of my supplier or vendor or OEM use those components. So at the end, it reduces the amount of spare I need to take in stock because I have some level of standardization to be done. So yeah, it's just coming back to the point. So yeah, again, it's just an example. This what spares and optimization. There's a lot of things also we can look at prior to the startup of sites.
Yeah. And in our OR plan, we'll determine that as well, right? We'll talk about, well, what's your consignment strategy? What are we doing here with spare selection? And then based on what the consignment strategy is, that'll determine also your inventory size and what you're going to do for the warehouse. And typically what we find is, you know, some juniors sometimes will look to save some money. We'll look at the warehousing. We'll look at spares as well. And then they'll also look at strategic partnerships with some of the vendors and seeing here, well, what's the minimal spares that I can get off with for the first 2 years? Then as we sell more and we're more successful here, then they look at changing their strategy as well. And they're also looking at financing deals, but all that's captured originally here so that there are no surprises. And so that can also staff up your warehousing team accordingly. But we've talked a lot about that yesterday, actually, and give a few examples from projects that we've been in that, you know, unfortunately, you know, they had to make some compromises, but at least that was captured on and that was well communicated. And that's the whole point. We don't want to have any surprises. Come in here during execution, realize that, you know, we're $50 million short. Well, what do we do? Then it becomes a panic. So spare selection, you know, consignment, that's a lot of what we look at in terms of maintenance and also in terms of the procurement for the owner's team.
That's great. And I guess from a project standpoint as well, I mean, we go from feasibility studies and we have a really good plan to execute. And it seems like, you know, too often the goalposts get moved, right? And then it has a significant impact on your time of delivery and more specifically on your budget. You know, I've seen some projects where it really gets out of hand. So I guess with those best practices and the data that you've had from all those projects that you've been managing around the world, I guess that's something that you're bringing to the table as well. Yeah.
So when we're in execution, every department has what we call critical tasks. Not only on the long lead path, but what are items that we know we can't move? And then when you look at reporting and tracking, we've instigated dashboards for our clients that clearly highlights in red which ones are the critical tasks and which ones are we behind on, right? And we would review this either on a weekly or biweekly basis with the teams. And asset optimization and the maintenance team would also have their own set of critical tasks as well. And then from there, we make sure that we don't slip on those. And we have full management sponsorship and visibility to make sure that we're not just looking at these in silos, you know, as a little small OR team, but we're looking at it with the greater team, taking consideration, for example, VPs or people from the board. And we're providing them with summarized reports to give them a really good idea of how we're progressing and where we might be at risk. Because operational readiness is a risk mitigation strategy and tool that we use.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly right, Joffrey. So yeah, it's all about getting ready as much in advance as you can. So at the study stage, you need to think about how I'm going to operate and maintain this installation that we're building and all that. So the earlier you think about it, and you make sure that afterwards in the next phase of the project, there will be like budget missing because there's things you didn't think about before, and now you need additional budget to get those elements done and all that. So we want to avoid all of this. So think really early in a project what you're going to do at operation and maintenance down the road after commissioning, and then it will help you a lot to make sure you don't forget any important point that can have an impact on your schedule and your cost for the project.
Right. And critical tasks are not just physical items like spares or assets or infrastructure. They're also tied to important hiring milestones as well, right? Exactly. Because when we need to hire certain team members that will start implementing the systems, well, those people, those positions become critical tasks. Same thing with setting up certain processes and systems, right? When we look at setting up an ERP, which we've done on other projects here, even recently, that's a long process. You know, that's a long lead. We can't just leave that to chance, and we can't just leave that to the end. That's something that usually takes multiple iterations, is always longer than we think.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've supported as well. You know, talking about big players like SAP and the SAP PM function, we have specialists within our team that do this on multiple different fronts, right? Not just integrating, helping with the integrating, looking at the strategy, building the maintenance tactics that Eric is going to talk a bit more about later on. But, you know, that's something that, you know, critical tasks is not just, hey, I'm selecting my spares on time or I'm building this asset on time. There's a whole gamut that falls under OR that we need to consider.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, there's no sense of having all the assets in the right spots and nobody to be in the seats.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. Yeah.
And yeah, like, and to your point, those SAP rollouts and those systemic solutions that they require a lot of configurations and sometimes customizations, and it can throw you off guard, right?
Oh yeah. So and it's good, and again, you can have the best OR plan and maintenance readiness plan in the world, but at the end, also after the commissioning, you need to make sure, even if you have trained all the people, you have all those systems defined and set up and all that, when it's time to operate it, so are you sure that all your people really know what they need to do? Okay, get the plant working and started and all that. So at this phase also, it's also critical to have sufficient amount of expert and resource to be able to facilitate and lead those startup for the operation, because there's so many things that are going to happen. There are going to be failure. There are going to be events you did not expect it when you start to operate. So you need to make sure you don't forget the long-term plan, okay, and just look at day-to-day what's going on today. So you'll need some also expertise at that stage as well when you get to operation.
Right. On that vision delivery, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like your group.
Yeah. So that's why when you have those people that know about operation and maintenance are involved in the OR project, the maintenance readiness project, it's going to be a much better project, because there's the one at the end that's going to live with what you have done.
Right.
So if we have done things not the right way, so we'll have to change it back later. And again, it's cost and all that, won't have the time and money to do that. So you need to make sure that you take the right decision from the start, so to avoid all those changes that could be required.
It's definitely a mindset. Not everyone, you know, can be put into a situation like this and be successful in terms of a startup and that energy that comes with it. And having a short-term project mentality isn't really what we're looking for, and what would be the ideal candidates to help support this. Because typically in the project environment, it's very fast-tracked, you're very short-term thinking, you're delivering up to a certain scope, and you're so focused on the scope that if there's any changes, then it becomes a bit catastrophic. There's a bit of back and forth and iterations with OR and maintenance readiness that we want to make sure that, you know, as we're going along, like Eric said, we have that long-term vision and we're successful, and always thinking about, you know, how would I set up, you know, my kitchen if I were to do a home reno, for example. You know, I want to make sure that everything is in alignment and that have the buy-in from your partner, right? And from, you know, your children if you have children, but it's a whole family affair, because ultimately you're going to live in that house for a while. And it's the same thing here in operations, right? When we're setting ourselves up, it's not just for the first 6 months after we've proven that we've ramped up successfully. It's, hey, we want to sustain operations, and we want to have, you know, the documentation that's in place. We want to have a successful warehouse, right? We want to have our maintenance capabilities that are established. We don't want to retrain half of our workforce because we weren't successful on that, right? We don't want to hire a bunch of service providers to come do some of our work. You know, we want to be able to be sustainable, right?
Right.
So that's a big component.
I guess habit formations, right? Like habit formation, so that it becomes a very repeatable pattern. And from what I'm hearing right now, so I've got a pretty in-depth sports background, and I always, you know, come back to the dieting stage, right? Where a lot of times you'll have like an objective, whether it's an event, whether it's a contest, whether, hey, I'm going to the Olympics, whatever it is. And it's a very, very finite time schedule and a very finite path, so you're able to stick with it. But then if they say you got to maintain this now and be healthy for 75 years,
Yeah.
things kind of
It's a tough one, right?
And you have some practices, you better get in right from the start, because if you let people take bad behaviors at the startup, at the operation and all that, later try to change that back to where you want, where your vision is, it would be probably a big challenge. So if you can, from the start, everybody aligning on your vision and all this, and make sure those things will happen, and people be trained and coached on this vision, so it will make your operation much more efficient and much quicker and for the long term.
yeah, from a cultural alignment, and then it becomes a social behavior.
Yeah.
Like, this is the social behavior
Good
of being,
culture of the company. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So through your risk mitigation plans and through your risk assessments and your operational readiness plans, are you able to share maybe one or two things that you saw as a consequence or an impact that you didn't foresee that we should consider? But also not necessarily a consequence that was negative, but a consequence that was very positive that you didn't see actually being a possibility until it actually happened. Do you have any of those moments where you're like, wow, well, that's pretty cool. We didn't see that happening.
Yeah. I'd say the biggest thing for us is there are a few lingering deliverables that needed some change and needed some support from the management team here at the client side that didn't necessarily happen as quickly as we'd like. If I were to take an example from a project that we worked on, we talked about warehousing, but that whole warehousing component, sometimes it could be quite expensive, right? And sometimes it's not viewed as a value add. So the running gag in one of our projects was that we would store the spares outside in the snow, and then when we'd need them, we'd shovel them out, and then we'd use them, right? So I think for us, I mean, one of the items here, if I take your question, is we didn't get the level of ownership that we wanted on the warehouse on that example for that project, for that client, right? And the mitigation strategy was just going plain old secants, right? That's really what it was, and making sure that at least we have somewhere that we can store and that we can find a creative way to use the project team secans and use that as a temporary solution just as we get into operations, right?
So you don't have to go chisel your parts out of your yard.
At least we have the bare basics. And I think
and some components, if they're not stored properly in the right environment, they're going to deteriorate. So the day you want to use them, they won't be working. So you have to reorder other ones. So it's still critical for some parts to be stored the right way.
I think the strategy with that client was also in the summerish period. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that critical to have a warehouse at this moment. But Eric is definitely right with regards to storing parts, especially longer term. And we've seen claims go against certain companies that will procure ahead of time and then have their spares, there in warehouses and then not have the proper care and maintenance, which is a big component as well.
Then end up being brand new used.
Yeah. Brand new used, that's right. Yeah.
Because we had another project with the client, and the project was delays, but we got all those equipment and parts to receive already. But again, we didn't have any spares. A place for the warehouse were not finished and all built and all that. So we had all those spares all over the place, different location. So we had to send a team of people that will go look at those spares, which one are critical, which one we should make sure they are protected, for having deterioration and all that. So we had to do that course because the project was delays and we were overwhelmed with a lot of materials, equipment that could not install right away. So we needed a mitigation plan for when it happened and all that. So,
get out of the reactive state, right?
Yeah. So,
is there something wonderful that you've actually had to happen where you've had all your right plans in place and then the intent was to achieve X, but then somehow this happened and we didn't see that coming? That was a very positive output.
Again, it depends. The bad thing on our side and our business at some time, when the project's delivered and all that, we're not always involved in project. We don't have always the opportunity to see the results of what we have built, we developed. Of course, we hear from clients, and I remember one project in asset management we did in the past, and in my past experience on my side, and so we implemented some best practices at that site, and this has improved a lot the range time of the employees. Okay, so they're getting more efficient because all the work was planned and scheduled, organized, and all that. They had all the parts material they needed was already kitted and prepared and all that. So the efficiency of the tradesman has involved by so much that later on, the client, after like 6-9 months, he called us back. Hey, finally, I don't have enough work for all my people. So what do I do? So by the end, that's an example of a good outcome from the thing that we do to improve efficiency and all that. So we said, okay, let us have a look. Maybe those guys can be put on more value-added tasks that can improve still your efficiency later. And that site was located in an area where sometimes they will auto industry was pulling out some of the resource, and also a lot of the workforce was retiring in the next few years to come. Say, oh, don't get rid of your team because you'll need a minimum staff later on. But we found value-added tasks to these guys to be done, and it just improved more on the top that was already done. So that's an example of type of rewards that we get at the end of projects.
And what a great impact it has on a culture, because everybody feels like they're winning.
Oh, yeah.
And then then you start realizing, wow, we did spend a lot of time before firefighting.
Yeah.
We did spend a lot of time being reactive.
Yeah.
And then you bring any challenge to them, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll knock it out of the park. So that is a great story.
Sure.
Yeah. I think there's one positive share that we can take also from another project that we worked on together, where Eric had seconded some team members to operational readiness here for a client that also required a lot of maintenance readiness work. We had their whole mobile fleet, their whole fixed plant fleet that we were doing. We also did some cataloging as well. You talked about spares and not knowing how many you have or having a lot of duplicates. Well, when you have a catalog that's well set up, you essentially don't have that problem, right? Because you come in prepared. And your bolts are well described, and not just one item that says this is a bolt or this is a wrench or this is a filter press, right? It goes into a lot more details. But I think one thing that we looked at is, with Eric's team and the systems that we have in place, with the planning that we did, we took six consultants over a year and a half, and we were very upfront with the client as to what our timelines were. And we also participated in the integration. But over that year and a half, with diligent planning and the best practices that we had, we were able to not only do all the strategies for the mobile and fixed plants, but have that integrated in their SAP. We also we sent a person to do on-field validations, which was something that the client really appreciated, because these can often just become desktop exercise that we do remotely. And we wanted to get the buy-in from the client, from the trade. So we had people go on site, print these out, do the walk downs, making sure that the corrections are put back in, and really that whole life cycle here during OR that we were able to do. And that was a success, given the challenges that we had and the timeline and the pressure. So, it was really thanks to the systems that Eric put together and the team members that he developed. So it was a great success.
Yeah. So at the end, the tradesmen get accurate, like inspection sees and all that. So it's very important to gain credibility with the system, because if you happen to receive documents that are not accurate for what you see in the field, you have a mismatch there, and you lose trust from the tradesmen. So it's really important to be accurate on that.
Because we're always like that, right? The second one, if you look at even, some notes, the second that your first sentence is wrong, you think the whole note is wrong, right? Very, very easily, when you get to startup, you're looking at these maintenance tactics, and you're thinking to yourself, well, this is all wrong. And then the whole program is scrapped, and next thing you know, your name is in the mud, right? So you want to definitely avoid that at the beginning.
And this is the same at the beginning. Again, we're not perfect from the start. So yes, we could have missed a few things. So we expect to have feedback from the tradesmen and the people, but if they write feedback, nobody take care of it, do the change in the system, they will lose credibility right away. They won't give you any more feedback. So all this relationship and it's really, really important as well to get the success.
So there's a lot of planning that goes into it, right? You have to identify the quantity of work that goes into just getting the strategies prepared, mobilize the support that you need, but also on the client side, have the supervisors and tradesmen available earlier than just the day that you operate. And that's the thing, because if we had no tradesmen, we had made the analogy before, if we had no tradesmen to be there to do the validation, a few months before, that would be a lost opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then they'd come in a little bit late, and then next thing you know, they'd inherit whatever they'd inherit, and then they'd have no feedback, no buy-in. And then that whole, that cultural experience of, hey, I'm putting into this startup and I'm investing my time, and it's really my tactics, my plan, and you lose some of that. So
and then the culture starts to cascade right behind it, right? I mean, one of the things that I talked about a lot with my team as well internally is that systems will set you free. Right? And they're like, well, what do you mean? So because it becomes the backbone of everything you do. And when you feel like you're in the wilderness, or you feel like you're kind of losing your way, you can always depend on the system that's there to bring you back on track, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's the same. Like you said, so you need to have some assessment or auditing tools down the road to make sure you keep track with what was design and the vision you had. So again, people are people. So sometimes we try to take shortcuts and all that. So we need to correct the behavior, when they happen and all that. It's really important, because if we let go, everybody do what they think is best. So we're going to have the chaos down the road. So we need to make sure that, everybody is aligning. So we have our assessment tools and all that, and we make sure everybody keeps on the plan we built and all that, and keep track on this.
Exactly. Every good team needs a good set of coaches. They can't all be coaches.
Agreed.
So then, as we start wrapping things up, are there any things from what's going on right now with Osenko that you want to bring forward and talk about with our viewers that they want to consider that we haven't touched on?
On my side, maybe one element would be interesting to discuss as we go also during the engineering design, a different stage of the project. Would like to have like reliability review to be performed. So we have a checklist, we have a list of items we want to validate. But again, it's all to think about very often about maintainability. So how I'm going to be able to inspect that component of that piece of equipment? Do I have access to it? Do I need a man lift each time I need to have to check it, or I need a platform to get that? If I have components to replace, do I have all the tools, the beams, the hoist above it for me to do my job? So this is also an important part of the design, looking the reliability review and make sure you design also your asset to be reliable, so you can work with your OEM when they design assets especially for you. So make sure that their design will also be reliable. So, and we can perform like things like what we call RCM, reliability centered maintenance. So, activities on those assets to make sure we identify all the potential failure mode. We got the right corrective action, or sometimes we need to change the design because we're not sure that we're going to get the reliability that we need for that asset to be performing well in our system and our production process. So again, it's all other aspects that we can look at the design phase for project to ensure you got better product at the end.
Yeah, I guess you got two segments. You got the routine tasks and the non-routine tasks.
Yeah.
And what do we have there to support? Because normally where things start falling apart is the non-routine stuff, right?
Yeah.
There you had everything in line at the beginning, and then 2 years goes down the road, and you finally have to do that task, and then the procedure is, where is it? And so that's very, very important. I like that.
Yeah.
I think for us here, when it comes to operation readiness, is just breaking some of the stereotypes and opening up the conversation, because not a lot of people are aware of what's required. There are no standards, let's say, for operation readiness like there are for maintenance. It's a bit of a black science to certain people. A lot of people associated with commissioning, they just say, well, operation readiness is just support during commissioning. It's the whatever procedures we'll just put together quickly. It's the support and checking maybe the performance guarantees, and then that's all, right? And like we talked a bit about today, and like we talked on our short course yesterday, it's more getting that education and that knowledge out, and realizing that the project team is not going to do all this for you. And I think that's a common misconception. Same thing on the maintenance side. People often think that the project teams will automatically send you all the vendor information, and it really depends on the contract. And the project team will help you with some of all your best practices in terms of maintenance to set you up. The project team will buy your spare parts, and typically it's only the commissioning spares in most contracts, and that will really depend. But I think it's more understanding that, operation readiness isn't just spare parts, and isn't just the warehouse, and isn't just these things that these archetypes that we're used to talking about. It's really the whole view, starting earlier, ideally, and like I said, in feasibility, if we can, and pre-feasibility, depending on, the project and the budgets allowed. But now they're being required for AFEs at the conceptual stage, right? A lot of bigger projects are asking for OR and also maintenance component for AFE approvals, right? And it's becoming a lot more important for bankers, for board members to look into this, to see here if you've actually considered, what the client team is going to look like during the project phase. So I think it's earlier than you think, and it's not just certain specific tasks, and it's just the whole involvement in getting that sponsorship from the client team, and it's going to quickly become as important as the project itself. And I think more and more people are realizing that.
Like the performance sustainability, right?
Yeah. And again, today we just talk about some of the OR elements, some of the asset management. There's also all the safety, environment, finance, supply chain. So there's a lot of things that needs to be looked at the at the early phase of project and all that as well. So so the scope is quite large in our business of what we do.
Yeah.
And again, the more you can do and think about is always going to be the best for you for success, for sure.
And the great thing about, if I can add to that, Eric, the great thing about Ausenco is that we also there's a lot of SMEs that are on hand that have that specialty in training, for example, or in HR, in mining operations, obviously in maintenance, but in a few of these other things that we typically have called on during, engagements to say, hey, we need you for 3 months to get, the client team organized, and to help them develop some of these procedures or develop some of these strategic documents, and be more of a sounding board for some of the questions that they have, because not everyone has been through this before, right? The startup, like we had mentioned, is a different environment, and it's not everyone has been that. Typically you're in operations, right? It's traditional role, you're in operations, but you haven't participated in that whole startup phase during the project team. So, we have the SMEs on hand to come and support as required, depending, on where the project is and the requirements and the challenges faced by the client team.
Very good. Very good. So what I'm hearing is that there's no better day than now,
Yeah.
That's right.
and that Osenko has your back for today's delivery and the future.
Sure.
Is that correct?
That sounds great.
That sounds good.
Right on. Well, I thank you very much, gentlemen,
Great.
for coming on board. It was an amazing conversation. I learned a lot from Osenko, and also what's going on in the world as far as long-term sustainability with the demand that we have out there.
Yeah.
So thank you
Awesome.
for coming on.
Thanks, Gus. Appreciate it.
Right on.
Thank you.
There we have it. Another great episode with Mining Now at CIM 2023. And looking forward to all of your comments and everything that you can put below the video. And we'll catch you on the next episode.